Hey there, curious minds. Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise and get straight to those aha moments. We're here to make you instantly well-informed on topics that really matter. And today, well, we're tackling something truly monumental, a huge challenge, but also maybe a profound opportunity for an entire region. We're diving deep into the research paper, Transition Towards Decarbonized Power Systems and its Socioeconomic Impacts in West Africa. And look, this isn't just some dry academic paper. Think of it more like a roadmap, a potential path to a sustainable future, or maybe a warning of what could be lost. Our mission today: unpack this really extensive study, pull out the most important insights, and help you understand what a genuinely renewable energy future might look like for West Africa, and, crucially, what that means for the people living there.
Indeed. And it's quite significant, this study. It's actually the first of its kind for the West African power sector, looking that far ahead, all the way to 2050. It uses some pretty sophisticated modeling, linear optimization, basically, finding the most cost-effective way to meet future electricity demand, considering all the different technologies and, importantly, policy constraints.
Okay, let's unpack that. So what's the starting point? What's West Africa's energy story right now?
Well, currently, West African countries face a profound energy crisis. It's quite stark. We're talking about widespread energy poverty. Around 175 million people, that was nearly half the population back in 2016, lacking basic electricity. Many are still relying on unsustainable biofuels.
Wow, 175 million. That's a huge number. And okay, for those who do have some access to electricity, is it reliable? Is it affordable?
Unfortunately, no, not really. The electricity sector is significantly underpowered. Generation capacity, transmission systems, they're often inadequate. Access is only about 52% on average across the region. And in some countries, it's shockingly low, like 9 to 13%. Plus, the electricity prices, they're among the costliest globally, over double the average at about 0.21 US dollars per kilowatt hour.
Right, so high prices, really low access, unreliability. And you mentioned a growing population earlier. That sounds like a recipe for serious problems unless something changes drastically. How much is demand expected to grow?
The projections are quite staggering. Demand is set to increase fivefold by 2030. That's reaching 250 terawatt hours. The current grid capacity it simply cannot handle that kind of increase. And that leads to frequent load shedding, planned blackouts, and a costly reliance on backup generators for businesses and homes that can afford them.
Okay, so the need is urgent. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, right? The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, they've seen these linked problems, the energy crisis, climate change, energy security. They've actually set targets already for renewables, haven't they?
That's right. EcoWays has shown ambition. They were aiming for renewables to supply 35% of grid-connected electricity by 2020 and then 48% by 2030. They also want to boost rural access using decentralized renewables like mini-grids or solar home systems. And these goals, they reflect, global commitments like the Paris Agreement and SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy.
So the ambition is there. But is it, actually achievable? Are we talking about futuristic tech here? Or is this something that's happening now globally that West Africa can genuinely tap into?
Oh, it's absolutely happening now, and at an incredible speed, really. Globally, renewable energy capacity just surged. It went from less than 1,000 gigawatts back in 2007 to over 2,100 gigawatts by 2017. And that growth, it's largely been driven by solar PV and wind power. But what's perhaps even more crucial, especially for West Africa, is the dramatic fall in costs.
Oh, okay, the cost decline. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Because that's so often presented as the main hurdle, isn't it?
It used to be, but things have changed rapidly. The levelized cost of electricity to the LCOE, basically the lifetime cost for utility-scale solar PV, it plummeted, down by 73% between 2010 and 2017 alone. So now, renewables are often outcompeting newly built fossil fuel power plants on cost in many, many parts of the world. And West Africa itself it's blessed with vast renewable resources. Solar potential is huge, obviously, but also wind, hydro, and biomass. They're widely distributed across the region, too.
That's fantastic news, really encouraging. But think about the climate there. You have the monsoon season. Imagine that creates a lot of seasonal variability, right, for things like solar and hydropower.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that inconsistency?
That's a key challenge, absolutely. And it really highlights the need for Much better electrical interconnections within the ECOWAS region, like a stronger regional grid. This allows different areas with different weather patterns or resource availability to share power and balance supply and demand across that larger area. It helps smooth things out. And this study, importantly, specifically investigates the role of things like flexible generation, those interconnected networks, and of course, storage solutions to manage that variability.
Right, okay. So the challenges are real, but there are solutions. Now, how does this study map out the way forward? I understand it developed 6 different scenarios. Can you give us a quick rundown, especially the contrast between what they called the best policy and current policy pathways?
Certainly. So the core distinction is between these best policy scenarios, let's call them BPS, and the current policy scenarios, or CPS. The BPS pathways, they assumed ambitious policies aiming for 100% renewable energy by 2050. They often included things like carbon emission costs to price pollution, and they also looked closely at the impact of cross-border electricity trade, comparing an area-wide approach, meaning strong regional integration, versus a countrywide approach where countries act more like islands.
Okay, so BPS is the ambitious, fully renewable goal. What about CPS?
The CPS pathways, well, they projected the future based more on existing ECOWAS targets, just up to 2030. And then after that, they basically extrapolated current trends. That meant a continued significant reliance on fossil fuels, natural gas, coal, even some projections included nuclear power. Essentially, it's the business as usual trajectory, more or less.
Got it. So the study compared what could happen with a big shift to renewables versus what's likely if things just keep going as they are now. So what did the modeling actually reveal? What's the cost-optimal way for West Africa to generate its power in the future?
The results are, well, quite striking, actually. In those best policy scenarios, solar PV, photovoltaic solar emerges as the undisputed champion, the absolute prime source.
Yeah.
By 2050, the modeling suggests solar PV could supply somewhere between 81% and 85% of the total electricity demand across the region.
81 to 85%.
Yeah.
That's massive.
Yeah.
So West Africa essentially becomes the solar powerhouse in this optimal future.
Precisely. That's what the least cost modeling points towards. The study projects installed solar capacity reaching 284 to 328 gigawatts by 2050 in these scenarios. Huge numbers. Now, it's complemented by other renewables, too. Of course, hydropower, bioenergy, wind energy play important roles. The study shows Nigeria, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire would drive about 80% of the regional demand. But solar PV is prominent everywhere, and wind becomes particularly strong in places like Niger and Mali, which have excellent wind resources.
Okay, that's an incredible amount of infrastructure to build out. But what does it mean for the actual cost of electricity? For people, for businesses?
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting for you listening. The study specifically optimized for the least cost solution over the long term, and the finding is that the average cost of electricity could fall dramatically. From around $70 per megawatt hour in 2015, it could drop to as low as $36 per megawatt hour by 2050.
36 compared to 70.
Yes, in the scenario with strong cross-border interconnection. Without that strong interconnection, it's a bit higher, around $41 per MWH. It's still a massive reduction.
So hang on. A greener system, a 100% renewable system, is actually significantly cheaper. That's a powerful message.
Absolutely. It really underscores the cost competitiveness of these renewable technologies, especially solar PV when you plan strategically for the long term. The fuel is free, after all.
Okay, a system dominated by solar sounds great, and cheaper is even better. But as we touched on, what about nighttime? What about those cloudy monsoon weeks? How does a grid that's, say, 85% solar stay stable and reliable 2047?
Yeah, that's the crucial question of system flexibility. And this study goes deep into that. It's vital. The solutions aren't just one thing. They're multifaceted. You need energy storage. You need a really robust, well-connected transmission grid. You need flexible, dispatchable renewables. Think hydro reservoirs that can release water on demand, or bioenergy plants, and even strategically managing demand or curtailing excess production sometimes.
Okay, so storage is key there. What kind of storage did the study find most important for West Africa? Was it batteries or something else?
Battery storage really emerges as the critical element, particularly for handling those daily cycles, charging during peak sun hours, discharging in the evening and overnight. Batteries provide the flexibility to cover a big chunk of the demand when solar isn't available, up to 44% of that residual load in the best policy scenarios. And hybrid systems, combining PV panels directly with batteries at the same site, seem to be the least cost way to achieve that daily balancing.
And connecting everything. All these solar farms, wind farms, hydro dams, potentially across, 15 different countries? That sounds like a huge engineering and political challenge.
It is a challenge, but the transmission network is absolutely fundamental for flexibility. It's what allows you to balance those big regional differences in generation, sunny here, windy there, hydro somewhere else, and also smooth out the seasonal variations from the monsoon. The study shows grid utilization increasing massively by a factor of 7.6 in the best policy scenarios compared to the current policy ones. That just shows how much more power is flowing across borders, how interconnected it becomes.
So that cross-border trade, the West African Power Pool, or WAPP, isn't just a nice-to-have, it's actually essential for making this whole renewable system work affordably and reliably.
Exactly. This study really demonstrates that. You see countries like Niger and Mali becoming net exporters of cheap solar and wind power. Others like Guinea, with good hydro resources, act as balancing regions. And the economic benefits are potentially enormous. The World Bank has estimated that a fully functional WAPP could generate benefits of 5 to 8 billion US dollars per year for the region.
Wow. Okay, what about existing power sources, like natural gas turbines? Do they just disappear in this 100% renewable future, or do they still have a role?
Their role changes dramatically. That's the key takeaway. In the best policy scenarios, gas turbines aren't used for bulk baseload electricity generation anymore. Instead, they transition to becoming flexible, fast-ramping peaking units. They'd mainly be used during really challenging periods, like maybe during the peak of the monsoon when solar and hydro might be lower, or for very specific grid stability services. Their total operating hours plummet compared to today or the current policy scenarios.
Okay, and you mentioned curtailment earlier. That still sounds a bit like wasted energy. Can you explain why that's considered a flexibility option?
Yeah, it can sound counterintuitive, but think of it this way. Sometimes, especially during very sunny or windy periods, you might have more renewable generation than the grid needs at that exact moment, even with storage charging. Curtailment means you intentionally dial back the output from some wind turbines or solar farms temporarily. It's often a cheaper way to keep the grid stable and prevent overloads than, say, building even more massive amounts of storage or transmission just for those peak moments. And interestingly, the study found curtailment levels were much higher in the scenarios without strong interconnection. It shows that a well-connected grid actually reduces the need for curtailment because you can send that excess power somewhere else where it's needed.
Right, that makes sense. It's like a managed overflow valve. Okay, so we've established the renewable pathway looks cheaper. Let's compare the two pathways, best policy versus current policy more directly now. Financially, what's the bottom line difference by 2050? And what about the environment?
The contrast is really stark. As we said, the LCOE, the average electricity cost, it dramatically declines in the best policy scenarios, potentially hitting that $36 per mMWh mark. But in the current policy scenarios, it actually increases significantly over time, reaches about $116 per mWh by 2050.
Wow, 116 versus 36.
Yeah.
So sticking with current policies, relying more on fossil fuels, makes electricity nearly 3 times more expensive in the long run. Why is that?
Primarily due to fuel costs, the rising costs of natural gas and coal over time, and also, importantly, the cost associated with greenhouse gas emissions, especially if carbon pricing is introduced, which is increasingly likely.
Okay, so cost is a huge difference. What about those greenhouse gas emissions themselves?
Equally dramatic difference. In the best policy scenarios, emissions from the power sector decline rapidly, especially after 2025, and they reach effectively zero by 2050. This aligns perfectly with, say, the Paris Agreement goals. In the current policy scenarios, however, GHG emissions just keep going up. They continue to increase throughout the entire period, reaching around 209 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2050. So it completely fails on the climate front.
So cheaper, cleaner. It sounds like a win-win. But what about jobs? That's always a critical factor, a major socioeconomic impact, particularly in West Africa. How do the scenarios compare there?
This is genuinely one of the most compelling findings in the study, I think. The best policy scenarios, the renewable pathway, would create more than twice the number of direct energy sector jobs compared to the fossil fuel-based current policy scenarios. We're talking about roughly 440,000 direct jobs by 2050 in the best policy case. And solar PV is the big engine here, accounting for about 300,000 of those jobs alone.
That's huge. 440,000 jobs versus how many in the other scenario? And what kind of jobs are we talking about? Is it just temporary construction work?
Well, compared to the roughly 183,000 jobs in the current policy scenario by 2050, so significantly fewer. And regarding the type of jobs in the renewable scenario, initially, yes, construction and installation jobs dominate as you rapidly build out capacity. That's the initial surge. But the study anticipates that from 2025 onwards, you see a growing share of local manufacturing jobs, assuming policy support developing domestic supply chains. And crucially, by 2050, the largest single sector becomes operation and maintenance, O&M. That accounts for about 41% of the total jobs.
Ah, okay. So it transitions from primarily construction to long-term sustainable O&M and potentially manufacturing roles within the region. That's a really key point for development.
Exactly. It fosters local capacity, skills, and long-term employment. In contrast, the current policy scenarios see jobs more dominated by fuel supply chains and O&M for conventional plants. But, as we said, the overall number is much lower. The renewable path offers a much more robust and sustainable job market for the region.
This deep dive has really laid out such a clear fork in the road, hasn't it, for West Africa's entire energy future. So pulling it all together, what are the absolute key takeaways, the main policy implications from this study for leaders in the region?
The modeling outcomes are, frankly, unambiguous. A 100% renewable energy system anchored by solar PV and supported by flexibility measures like storage and transmission is not only technically feasible for West Africa, it's also the least cost pathway. It's the pathway with the lowest greenhouse gas emissions reaching zero. And it's the pathway that creates the most jobs. It aligns perfectly with global climate goals like the Paris Agreement and also with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
And critically, it doesn't even need subsidies, right? You made that point earlier. It's the least cost option inherently. That just turns so many old arguments on their head.
That's such a crucial point from this study. The large-scale rollout of renewables, as modeled in the VEST policy scenarios, doesn't require subsidies at all to be competitive. It is, based on the projected costs, the most economically rational choice. Subsidies would only really become necessary if policymakers actively chose to deviate away from this least cost renewable path, perhaps to artificially prop up existing or new fossil fuel plants.
So the message to policymakers seems incredibly clear then. Put solar PV right at the core of ECO's energy planning. Invest heavily in strengthening the regional transmission grid to unlock that cross-border trade potential. And be very cautious about, or perhaps just limit, new investments in conventional power plants.
Precisely. And this study strongly suggests that building new large-scale fossil-based power plants now would be, well, imprudent. They face risks of cost overruns. They could very easily become stranded assets as renewables get even cheaper, and fundamentally they lock in emissions and violate sustainability principles. This research really shows that West Africa's own vast renewable resources hold the key to unlocking a truly thriving, affordable, and sustainable energy future for millions of people.
What an incredible deep dive. It really drives home how economic goals and environmental necessities can actually align, can reinforce each other when we take that long-term, evidence-based view. The idea that a 100% renewable energy system for West Africa isn't just some distant dream, but is actually the most affordable and the most job-creating path forward, that's genuinely inspiring stuff. This study we've been discussing, Transition Towards Decarbonized Power Systems and Its Socioeconomic Impacts in West Africa, offers such a powerful data-driven vision for a region that's really on the cusp of massive change. It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that the future isn't just about, what we build, but very much about how we power it. And that choice has these profound impacts on people's lives, on economies, and of course, on the planet we all share. So, what stands out most to you from today's discussion? What lessons might this hold for energy transitions happening or needing to happen in other parts of the world, perhaps with similar challenges or similar resource potential? Keep those questions turning over in your mind. Keep that curiosity burning. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.
Until then, stay informed and keep learning.